There's an entirely different feminist narrative of both the origins and the historical trajectory of the New School.
In The Feminism of Uncertainty in 2015, Anne Snitow writes, "History may tell us that women have been present as key players in any number of movements. Documents exist, first-hand accounts list their names, but collective memory of these movements is quite a different matter. They have their stories, of course, but these are not often enough rehearsed, not inscribed on stones. The New School is a university with a distinctive radical history. Over the years, I've heard this history recited dozens of times. The founding moment was a rebellion against politically conservative, repressive, and entrenched academics. Columbia University had fired some of its professors who had spoken up against the U.S. entry into World War I. Out of this bold nucleus of heroic refuseniks, all of course male, came the New School's first generation, dedicated to the proposition that first-rate social science should be a force in the world, that there was no contradiction between serious academic research and engagement in social action."
It's not an accident that the New School began in Greenwich Village. And Greenwich Village was a place where women who were rejecting gender stereotypes way back into the 1880s, 1890s, it was where people like Victoria Woodhull, who was a member of the free love movement, was very active. Emma Goldman, who was an anarchist and a free lover. You know, the Greenwich Village was a site for people who were nonconformists and people who were radical.
Until the 60s, women continued to be cloaked in the names of their husbands. One finds their names on the New School's founding documents.
There were an incredible number of key female figures who had been part of the New School, shaped it, led it, and we rarely heard about them. Certainly the founding documents showed many women. At the time, I don't think we were quite so aware of we weren't aware of who these women were, but we saw a lot of covered names, Mrs. Charles Tiffany and so forth. And when I talked to a number of former deans, they often said, well, those were the women who gave money to the school, but there was no mention of their intellectual engagement or interests in the New School.
There was a female dimension to the origins of the New School. That we don't know it is very serious. That we can know it is the work of feminist historical recovery. And that we must know it and use it is up to us now, because we're walking in their footsteps.
I happen to know that the New School has been built on the shoulders and backs of many, many gifted women who remain unacknowledged also or sidelined to a large extent. I was unsure of the extent of that because I'm not a historian, but I did team up with Gina Walker, who is a historian at School for Public Engagement, and her specialty is recovering the legacy of women through history. And it was really under her leadership that she collected a group of women, myself included, to start looking at this issue on their 100th anniversary of the New School, and find those women who really were instrumental in building it up from the start.
We learned that in 1918, a group of 10 women signed their names with 9 men to a proposal for an independent school of social sciences for men and women. This was a fundraising document, as well as what New School historian Julia Folks describes as a call to educational arms. This is a collective biography of a group of distinctive women who had a remarkable unity of vision. Our 10 founding mothers used their intellect, progressive values, economic might, and shared strength to create a set of ideals and aspirations that we still struggle to realize today.
They got very involved in war work when they needed to. They were instrumental in suffrage. They founded things like the Urban League and participated in the NAACP. They experimented with divorce, which was still frowned upon, including Charlotte Sortion Mitchell. They lived openly with other women sometimes. In other words, they demonstrated what a feminist life can be.
I think one of the ways that the founding women were so influential was in making sure that there was space for women literally just to sit in a seat and get an education.
In 1918, the Founding Mothers committed to the reality that women might join men in another kind of shared enfranchisement, the life of the mind. For the 10 women, the new school would be the vehicle of a fierce female legacy forged over the previous 100 years of feminist struggle. The new school would offer women the chance to participate in the learned professions, which, since the ancients, had been the legitimate province only for men. Dorothy Payne Whitney Straight Elmhirst was a leading philanthropist who used her inheritance to spearhead radical feminist causes in New York. She backed the New Republic, a magazine that promoted progressive reforms, and made significant financial and visionary contributions in the first decade of the new school.
Dorothy is one of those people who's always thought of as the money bags kind of character. But she was much more than that.
Alvin Johnson had gone to the New Republic, which was the magazine that Dorothy Payne had, Whitney had started with her husband. And so there was just this collection of progressive thought there. And that was led by her. Because they were in touch with her, they obviously were having these conversations about what a new school would look like.
Dorothy Payne Whitney was one of the first women on the founding board. And she was one of the wealthiest women in the United States who very much wanted women to have sophisticated educational opportunities. She was very committed to the new school's mission from what little we know, and certainly gave it financial backing, and especially so in the 20s when it was having a hard time. But she was a key figure in kind of making sure the school got off the ground.
Emily James Smith Putnam graduated with the first class of Bryn Mawr College in 1889. In 1894, she became the first dean of Barnard College, where, under her leadership, female students were allowed to enroll in Columbia's graduate programs. Among the earliest female instructors of the new school, Emily was a maverick who fiercely entered male institutions of higher learning. Cornelia Solomon Schoeneich was a tenacious suffragist who fiercely challenged President Wilson's opposition to a woman's right to vote. An activist in New York City, Cornelia was one of the founders of the Women's City Club, an organization where peers like Frances Perkins, Ida Tarbell, and Eleanor Roosevelt would demand a voice in municipal policymaking. Caroline Tilden Bacon graduated from Smith College and went on to Columbia for her master's degree. Thanks to the interventions of Emily James Putnam, Caroline taught at Erasmus High School in Brooklyn and then joined the Smith faculty where she taught history. An early biographer writes, Caroline Bacon and the people she attracted had daring and the ability to translate daring into solid and practical reality. The Caroline Tilden Bacon Room at the new school was named in her honor.
Caroline Tilden Bacon, she also has a room at Radcliffe, believed, I won't get the quote exactly right, but she believed that the only thing worth doing in life was learning. Now, it seems to me that's quite a mandate for an academic institution.
Ruth Standish Baldwin graduated from Smith College in 1887 and later became the college's first female trustee. Committed to multiracial organizing, Ruth was the co-founder of the National League for the Protection of Colored Women. Under her leadership, the committee adopted the progressive politics of labor organizing and grassroots reform. Together with civil rights activist and sociologist George Edmund Haynes, Ruth co-founded the National Urban League. Frances Amelia Fincke Hand graduated from Bryn Mawr in 1897, where she served on the board of the college. She worked closely with the Fund for the Seven Sister Colleges to promote, fundraise, and change public opinion about higher education for women.
I mean, they were all wealthy. They could have been sitting in Europe and, doing whatever. They didn't have to do this. I mean, the heavy lift to start a school, and to start a school that is, that again, is to make sure that women are at the table. And immigrants, and because there was a large immigrant population coming into New York City at the time, that everyone gets to sit at the table because through education.
Margaret Dreier Robbins was a leader in feminist labor organizing. She established trade unions for women workers, and as president of the National Trade Union League, she created a training school to educate women. In 1919, Margaret created the International Congress of Working Women, where she organized representatives from 19 countries to discuss and promote fair labor standards for women that included a universal 8-hour workday and legally binding maternity leave. Charlotte Hunnewell Sorchin Mitchell was a philanthropist and designer. Charlotte is best known for the creativity behind Turtle Bay Gardens, a row of historic brownstones in Manhattan. She lent her architectural hand to the New School and championed radical administrative ideas.
And these were women, one of whom took off a pearl necklace worth $50,000 in 1918 that allowed the founding group, 9 men and 10 women, to purchase 6 or 8, the number isn't clear, brownstones in the Lincoln Terrace section of Manhattan. And although she was only identified by President Alvin Johnson as an amateur architect, but a talented one, well, how could she be anything else? Women weren't allowed in any kind of professional schools. But she converted it into, I think, a first campus. So we're going to find out more about that.
Katrina Brandes Ely dedicated a life of service to women's suffrage. Educated in history and political science at Bryn Mawr College, she served as chairwoman for the National American Woman Suffrage Association. Mary Harriman Rumsey was a 1905 graduate of Barnard College. She is best remembered for her advocacy of New Deal reforms. Before her untimely death, she joined policy-making circles in Washington, D.C., living for several years with Frances Perkins, Secretary of Labor. In 1933, President FDR appointed Mary to the National Recovery Administration, where she co-authored the Social Security Act, ensuring for the first time retirement savings for millions of Americans. Mary was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2015.
Here were 10 women, some of whom we knew about. But they together form a part of women's history in America that I haven't been able to find very much scholarship about. And that is what I think we can call American progressive feminism, which has gotten all wrapped up with the history and the struggle for suffrage. And of course, that was a very important part. But really, their roots, the roots of this feminism, comes from Mary Wollstonecraft and Mary Hayes at the time of the French Revolution and others who insisted at great personal and public cost that the rights of man must be extended to the wrongs of woman.
That legacy of women who creatively and intellectually mentor or support has been something that's a legacy from the New School.
From the beginning, the New School has been involved in contemporary social issues. And from the beginning, it has been a very progressive institution. And I have to imagine that the presence of these suffragettes had a lot to do with that. The concern with analyzing and understanding the world around you, analyzing and understanding how to make it better, finding solutions to the problems that are contemporary. They may be rooted in history, and of course most of our problems are, so knowing the past is really, really important, and knowledge is crucial. But figuring out ways to make the world a better place around you is something that I'm sure those women had in their minds at the very top of their agenda. And I think the New School has always reflected that from its founding, and that's one of the things that has made it arguably a distinctive university from the get-go. And I do think that their spirit lingers on in that respect.
We found more than 500 women whom nobody knew about. And that's what we should be learning. Because they're part of the woven weft of how come we're sitting here. And their absence means that we are denied the richness that they could bring to this past.